I was finally released from the Men's Virtue Institute. 300 days in total. I stood in the courtyard, breathing in the long mist fresh air.
Hurry up! What are you dawdling for?
Emily stood impatiently outside the fence, shouting at me. I quickly walked out of the institute and got into the car. My back accidentally touched the seat, and I let out a hiss.
Here, take this tissue.
The butler, seeing me drenched in sweat, handed me a tissue. I immediately held my head and said,
My fault, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have made a sound.
I curled up into a ball, repeatedly apologizing. Emily, noticing my odd behavior from outside the car, buried her head in her best friend Jack's chest and sneered.
Alex looks like an idiot.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Hearing this, I hurriedly continued to apologize to them. Emily laughed heartily as she got into the car, as if watching a show. The car sped along, and my back occasionally bumped against the seat. Sweat dripped from my forehead, and the butler occasionally glanced back at me.
Alex, you smell awful.
Mr. Fu must have had a tough time in there. He used to be so particular, and now he's wearing such cheap clothes.
This black outfit was given to me by the instructors, the most comfortable set I had during my time there. The black color was to cover my battered body. Before I left, the instructor said earnestly,
We once proposed an extra $6 million to get you out early. But your wife refused and transferred an additional $5 million, asking us to intensify your training. Don't blame us.
As the instructor said this, my hand, which was changing clothes, froze in midair. But I didn't dare hesitate. Hesitation would result in severe punishment. Every punishment in the Men's Virtue Institute made me face the brink of life and death. Just for saying thank you to the lunch lady, I suffered severe punishment on my lower body. Upon hearing this, the instructor immediately grabbed my collar and had dozens of strong men teach me a lesson. They branded my inner thigh with a hot iron, the smell of burning flesh filling my nostrils, as the instructor repeatedly said,
You must not look directly at women, and you must not speak to any women here, not even female rats.
The dormitory in the Men's Virtue Institute was on the second basement level, with no bedboards, and I could only sleep on the damp concrete floor every night. Often, while sleeping soundly, I would be awakened by the squeak of the teacher's voice. Accompanied by their taunts, my vision gradually blurred. I was sent to the Men's Virtue Institute thanks to Jack. When my wife was 8 months pregnant, I attended a high school reunion. I mentioned her male best friend, Jack, to my buddy Ethan.
It seems like there's a lush green field on your head.
After the banquet, I saw Jack with a beautiful woman in his arms as I passed by the next room. When I sobered up, I found myself tied up in a basement. Emily, with bloodshot eyes, gripped my chin.
Since you can't learn to uphold male virtues, I'll send you to learn.
Let go of me! What are you doing?
Jack has mentioned many times that you always have women around you and tarnish my reputation. She placed an admission letter in front of me. Sign it, and I'll let you go.
You think you can send me to some ridiculous place? Dream on!
Emily gently stroked her slightly swollen belly.
If you don't want to go, then this child doesn't need to stay.
No, I'll sign. I hurriedly signed the paper. Before leaving, I repeatedly urged her to take good care of herself and the baby, promising to return after completing my training.
I spent $10 million to send you there, don't disappoint me.
On the first day at the Men's Virtue Institute, new trainees had to endure a stamina test, the Water Dungeon Challenge. I soaked in the icy water for 2 whole days and nights. It wasn't until my cold-induced hives swelled my entire body beyond recognition that the instructor pulled me out.
Remember, here. The instructor's words are law. Disobeying orders leads to a dead end.
I was so frightened that I jumped from my seat. The butler struggled to keep the car steady.
What's wrong with you?
At that moment, another of the instructor's sayings echoed in my mind, a wife's words are law, do not disobey. I quickly turned around, holding my head, and repeatedly apologized to her.
Enough. Go freshen up and accompany me to the banquet. The car soon drove into the courtyard.
Mrs. Smith quickly approached to greet me. I hurriedly kept a 10-meter distance from her. I couldn't get close to women. Just sharing a car with Emily made my heart feel like it was about to stop.
Young master, are you feeling unwell?
It's nothing.
Hurry up, don't delay.
Mrs. Smith followed behind, explaining where the clothes were prepared. My steps quickened, and my heart pounded fiercely. I washed for a long time, and it was only after Emily urged me 3 times that I came out. I cherished the warmth of the water. In the Men's Virtue Institute, showers were on a points system, and always with cold water. It took 3 days' worth of points to earn the right to shower once, and the water was always at room temperature, even in the dead of winter. Mrs. Smith had prepared a suit for me that was 2 sizes too big. Emily frowned as she saw me dressed.
How did you get so thin? The clothes don't fit at all.
Emily always disliked my physique. She would often say to Jack, "You have a good build, protective. Look at Alex, a strong wind could blow him away." I took a few steps back, avoiding her touch. She was displeased and tossed the tie to me.
Can you tie it yourself?
After marriage, it was always her or Mrs. Smith who helped me with my tie. But now, I would rather do it myself than get close to her.
It seems the Men's Virtue Institute taught you a lot, even how to tie a tie.
Of course, with such expensive tuition.
Seeing Emily's satisfied expression, my heart sank. If she knew the real situation inside, would she still be this happy? The instructor's words hit me like a ton of bricks.
But your wife refused and transferred an additional 5 million, asking us to intensify your training. Don't blame us.
My hand froze in midair as I was changing clothes. Hesitation was not an option here, it would lead to severe consequences. I had learned that every punishment at the Men's Virtue Institute brought me to the brink of life and death.
Thinking, just for saying thank you to the lunch lady, I suffered severe punishment on my lower body.
The instructor grabbed my collar and had dozens of strong men teach me a lesson. They branded my inner thigh with a hot iron, and the smell of burning flesh filled my nostrils.
You must not look directly at women, and you must not speak to any women here, not even female rats.
The dormitory in the Men's Virtue Institute was on the 2nd basement level, with no bedboards, and I could only sleep on the damp concrete floor every night. Often, while sleeping soundly, I would be awakened by the squeak of the teacher's voice. The instructor's words rang in my ears, making my hand freeze in midair as I changed clothes.
But your wife refused and transferred an additional 5 million, asking us to intensify your training. Don't blame us.
I dared not hesitate. Hesitation here meant severe punishment. Every punishment at the Men's Virtue Institute brought me to the brink.
Yes, sir. I understand.
Just for saying thank you to the lunch lady, I had suffered severe punishment on my lower body.
Grab him.
The instructor grabbed my collar, and dozens of strong men taught me a harsh lesson. They branded my inner thigh with a hot iron, the smell of burning flesh filling my nostrils.
You must not look directly at women, and you must not speak to any women here, not even female rats.
The dormitory in the Men's Virtue Institute was on the 2nd basement level, with no beds. I slept on the damp concrete floor every night, often awakened by the squeak of the teacher's voice.
But your wife refused and transferred an additional 5 million, asking us to intensify your training. Don't blame us.
My hand, which was changing clothes, froze in midair. But I didn't dare hesitate. Hesitation would result in severe punishment. Every punishment in the Men's Virtue Institute made me face the brink of life and death. Just for saying thank you to the lunch lady, I suffered severe punishment on my lower body.
You must not look directly at women, and you must not speak to any women here, not even female rats.
Upon hearing this, the The instructor immediately grabbed my collar and had dozens of strong men teach me a lesson. They branded my inner thigh with a hot iron, the smell of burning flesh filling my nostrils. The dormitory in the Men's Virtue Institute was on the second basement level, with no bed boards, and I could only sleep on the damp concrete floor every night. Often, while sleeping soundly, I would be awakened by the squeak of the teacher's voice. I don't know how long I had slept when a pair of small hands grasped mine. The discomfort in my chest made me spring up from the bed. My daughter Lily held my hand, her big eyes blinking sweetly as she called,
"Daddy, wake up."
I immediately jumped out of bed. Emily, displeased, said,
What's wrong with you? It's your daughter, you're scaring her.
I crouched in the corner, hugging my head, trembling all over. Lily, not understanding, ran over and hugged me tightly. I shouted, Emily, take our daughter away! Seeing me shaking uncontrollably, Emily, realizing it wasn't an act, held Lily and sat to the side. With two women in the room, I was trembling so much that I couldn't even muster the strength to stand. With great difficulty, I managed to stand by holding onto the wall, but Lily broke free from Emily's embrace and ran towards me again. My vision went black, and I collapsed. My eyelids felt as heavy as lead. I loved my daughter very much. Many times, in the Men's Virtue Institute, when I was tortured and left bleeding in a dark corner, it was the thought of wanting to return and see my daughter that pulled my consciousness back. Countless nights, I bit my tongue, tasting the blood to maintain my remaining sanity. I knew I had to survive. Only by surviving would I have the hope of seeing my daughter again. The instructor's words hung in the air, causing my hand to freeze mid-motion as I changed clothes. But I knew better than to hesitate.
But your wife refused and transferred an additional 5 million, asking us to intensify your training. Don't blame us.
Hesitation here would mean severe consequences. The Men's Virtue Institute's punishments were a matter of life and death. I recalled the pain I endured for simply saying thank you to the lunch lady.
You must not look directly at women, and you must not speak to any women here, not even female rats.
The instructor grabbed my collar, and I was subjected to a brutal lesson. They branded my inner thigh with a hot iron while the smell of burning flesh filled my nostrils. My nights were spent on the damp concrete floor of the dormitory, often awakened by the teacher's voice. The instructor's words made my hand freeze in midair as I was changing clothes.
But your wife refused and transferred an additional 5 million, asking us to intensify your training. Don't blame us.
I didn't dare hesitate. Hesitation would lead to severe punishment. Every punishment at the Men's Virtue Institute made me face the brink of life and death.
You must not look directly at women, and you must not speak to any women here, not even female rats.
Just for saying thank you to the lunch lady, I suffered severe punishment. The instructor grabbed my collar and had dozens of strong men teach me a lesson.
You must not look directly at women, and you must not speak to any women here, not even female rats.
They branded my inner thigh with a hot iron, the smell of burning flesh filling my nostrils. The dormitory in the Men's Virtue Institute was on the second basement level, with no bed boards. I could only sleep on the damp concrete floor every night. Often, while sleeping soundly, I would be awakened by the squeak of the teacher's voice.
Alex, unless you amend the divorce agreement, I won't sign it.
Just then, Ethan happened to push the door open and enter.
That's not up to you.
Don't think you can make me leave with nothing. Have you forgotten that I still have the assets Alex's father transferred to me? I can survive in the business world, but I won't be satisfied.
Emily, have I wronged you in any way?
Alex, what's the point of saying this now?
After our marriage, Emily and I had 2 years of happiness. She would accompany my mom shopping, arrange health checkups and supplements for my dad. During holidays, she would have meals with my parents. My parents often told me to be devoted to my wife.
But you won't get anything my dad transferred to you.
A trace of panic flashed in Emily's eyes.
What do you mean by that?
Ethan took out 2 transfer agreements from his bag and threw them at Emily.
Aren't these the transfer agreements from back then? What's the point of showing them to me?
Take a look at the clauses yourself.
After reading them, Emily hysterically rushed to me.
What's going on? These weren't there before.
Emily, don't you recognize your own signature?
The agreements were indeed signed by Emily herself. After getting pregnant, she used her status to ask my parents for the Happy Harbor property. My parents, understanding her hardships, agreed. On the day the agreements were signed, Emily was in a hurry to buy a limited edition handbag, so she signed wherever the notary pointed without reading carefully. I trusted Emily, even though she had confessed before our marriage that she had someone else in her heart.
Do you still like her?
Of course not.
Emily, in her anger, tore up the 2 agreements. But Ethan had come prepared. Emily stormed out with Jack.
Don't even think about it.
My first surgery. No one told Emily. The night before, I talked with Ethan until midnight. Besides reminiscing, I also discussed my final wishes. I never mentioned these to my parents. I didn't know how to start. My dad's heart had not been well these past 2 years, and I didn't want to upset him.
I promise I'll handle the lawsuit beautifully, allowing you to focus on your treatment.
Before entering the operating room, I endured the discomfort and hugged Lily. Since her birth, I had never held her, and I didn't want to have any regrets.
Daddy, Lily will wait for you.
My mom, crying uncontrollably, held my hand and kept saying,
"We are all waiting for you, you must be strong."
I took one last look at them. As I expected, my health was too poor, and the stress of hospitalization left me with no rest. Eventually, I heard wailing in my ears. I could distinguish who they were, but I could no longer open my eyes.
Daddy.
I wanted to say goodbye one last time. A golden light flashed, and my soul gradually left my body, floating upwards. I saw my mom fainting in Mrs. Smith's arms, Lily being held by Ethan, wiping her tears. My brother Ethan clenched his fists, his teeth gritted. I entrusted Lily to Ethan. Over the years, he had been busy with his career and had not started a family. My parents would eventually grow old, and he was the person I trusted the most. Since Lily's birth, Ethan had always prepared gifts for her during holidays, using the title of Godfather. There were apartments, estates, convenience stores, and countless little trinkets. As for why they didn't come to rescue me from the Men's Virtue Institute, I investigated as soon as I got out. After my sudden disappearance, Ethan came back several times. Every time he looked for me, Emily claimed I was in a closed study session and wouldn't let anyone disturb me. He tried to find out my whereabouts, but the Men's Virtue Institute was too secretive. Emily was clearly prepared. I watched their sorrowful faces, wanting to reach out and comfort them, but I could do nothing. I watched them stay with me in the morgue all night, while Emily didn't send a single message. I told Ethan I had already bought a burial plot for myself. At the funeral, my mom prepared many snacks for me. Lily, so young, held Ethan's hand, her eyes full of confusion. The instructor's words echoed in my ears as I stood motionless, my hand frozen in midair while changing clothes.
But your wife refused and transferred an additional $5 million, asking us to intensify your training. Don't blame us.
I didn't dare hesitate. Hesitation would result in severe punishment. The Men's Virtue Institute was a place where punishment made you face the brink of life and death.
You must not look directly at women, and you must not speak to any women here, not even female rats.
Just for saying thank you to the lunch lady, I suffered severe punishment on my lower body. The instructor grabbed my collar, and I was beaten by dozens of strong men. They branded my inner thigh with a hot iron, the smell of burning flesh filling my nostrils. The dormitory was a cold, damp place on the second basement level. There were no bed boards, and I slept on the concrete floor every night. The teacher's voice often woke me from sleep with a harsh squeak. After my burial, Ethan focused entirely on the divorce case. He retaliated by using the media to expose Emily and Jack's affair.
Emily, you and Jack thought you could get away with this, but the world will know the truth.
Emily's social media was flooded with attacks. On the first night, she engaged in a fierce battle of words with netizens, trying to salvage her reputation.
Don't you cheat after getting married?
Instantly, she was bombarded with insults. She had no choice but to delete the account she had painstakingly managed for years. After returning to the country, Jack stayed in my suburban villa. Ethan had him and his belongings thrown out.
Emily, I have nowhere to go. Can I stay with you?
Jack, I'm also in a dire situation. My parents kicked me out. They called me ungrateful and vowed never to see me again.
The two of them lived in a small motel, relying on the little money they had left. The men's virtue institution they sent me to was also shut down by the police. When the conditions and everything inside were made public, my mom went to confront Emily.
Emily, how could you? You can't escape your fate.
Despite Emily's desperate attempts to deny everything, she couldn't escape her deserved fate. A week later, the court ruled that Emily would not only leave the marriage with nothing but also be sentenced for illegally transferring assets and spreading false information.
Jack, you owe me for all those years in my house. Pay up or face the consequences.
Jack couldn't afford it and tried to flee in the night. But there was no escape. Ethan reported him to the police for debt evasion, and Jack was arrested. Their fate was as I had expected. But what did I do wrong? After everything settled, Ethan took over the company according to my will. He treated Lily very well, taking her to amusement parks to cheer her up.
Lily, let's go to the amusement park today. I bought you some beautiful dresses and hair clips.
Mrs. Smith kept my memorial tablet spotless every day. I knew I hadn't misjudged them, they were deeply affected by my passing. My mom fell seriously ill, and twice she was given critical condition notices. Each time, I hovered outside the emergency room, filled with anxiety. I hope she recovers and takes Lily to see more of the world for me. When I saw her improving, I softly said goodbye to her in them. As time passed, my body became increasingly transparent, and I knew it was time for me to go. If there is a next life, we will surely meet again.